With the new Garfield movie that just came out earlier this year, I feel like this is a good time to talk about the old Garfield movie, especially since I feel like Garfield hasn't really got a lot of love since the Bill Murray days. And on top of that, this year also marks the 20th anniversary of this Garfield movie. As a kid, I actually owned this movie on DVD, and I remember I would watch it a lot as a child. 5-year-old me absolutely loved this movie, since it was pretty much my introduction to Garfield. But looking back at this movie now, yeah, I could definitely see this movie has its flaws, but I still find myself enjoying it for many reasons. For one, I think the casting of Bill Murray as Garfield was great, but however, he didn't actually want to do this movie. He got confused by the movie's actual writer, Joe Cullen, who was half of the Cullen brothers, and because of this, Murray didn't actually read the entire script and agreed to take the role, making it one of his biggest regrets.
So do you have any regrets?
Garfield, maybe?
So throughout the movie, Bill Murray sounds really bored, like he would rather be somewhere else, and he perfectly embodies the attitude that Garfield always displayed in the cartoons. His performance is even more entertaining if you imagine him rolling his eyes after every line that he's read. Now, like I said, as a kid, I remember I used to really like this movie, but once I got older and I read the comics and I watched the cartoons, then I ended up liking the cartoons even more. In fact, I remember back when Hollywood Video was still a thing, some of my most fondest memories was going there and renting out different seasons of Garfield and Friends. And what I think I liked most about the cartoons was how small scaled it was. Most episodes either took place in the house or in Garfield's neighborhood, and it didn't need a big story or something massive to happen, and it worked well. I also found Garfield to be more interesting as a character, especially with some of the things he would say, which I don't think he'll be able to get away with these jokes nowadays.
Arbuckle, you really ought to go out with my daughter sometime. She's really nice.
That means she's fat.
In fact, she's really sweet.
Means she's incredibly fat.
And very graceful.
So fat you wouldn't believe it.
Oh, and she has a wonderful personality.
If you come to pick her up, bring a moving van.
Now, there are a lot of problems with this movie. The one thing that's noticeable about this movie is how all the animals are real, except for Garfield. And I will admit, the CGI on Garfield, while it's not amazing for 2004, it doesn't look that bad or off-putting for the time that this came out. But there are some shots and facial expressions that Garfield makes that kinda do look a bit uncanny. But he definitely did look a lot better than Scooby-Doo. The one thing I noticed between this movie and the comics as a kid was how none of the characters looked or acted like the characters that they were based on. I mean, in the cartoons, Nermal was this gray tabby kitten with a high-pitched voice that would often visit Garfield to remind him of his old age. But in the live-action movie, Nermal is depicted as this dim-witted adult Siamese cat with a completely different voice.
It's just across the street. We're cats. We like milk. Let's go for it.
No.
But
Nothing.
They love me. That's because I'm so adorable. Unlike you.
This calls for drastic action.
The only character in this movie that I guess was acceptable to be cast as a real animal was Odie, who, just like in the cartoons, he was the only character that didn't talk and acted more like a real dog. Odie is really cute throughout the whole movie, which also, I wonder whatever happened to the dog that played Odie. One of the things I always noticed as a kid between the movie and the Garfield cartoons was how different Garfield and Odie's relationship was. In the cartoons and comics, I get that Garfield always treated Odie bad, but he never treated him too bad either. Garfield mostly just viewed Odie as being stupid, and he would love to take advantage of Odie's gullibility. But he would still show that he cared about him, and there would even be times where Odie would get revenge on Garfield. See, Garfield is a character that I feel like is perfectly balanced to be an asshole, but also funny enough to seem charming and likable. But here in the live action movie, Garfield is more mean-spirited and treats Odie worse, constantly hitting him, pushing him around, and kicking him off the couch.
Down, dumb dog.
And look, I completely understand it's supposed to be comedy, but I don't know, I just feel like there's some things that don't translate well in live action. But there was always one scene in the movie that made Garfield seem out of character. He gets kicked out the house for the night after destroying John's home, and sings a song called New Dog State of Mind.
But now the dog's in and I'm out. I've got no John, I've got no clout.
Odie, seeing that Garfield is feeling lonely, comes out to comfort Garfield, and this is honestly a really wholesome scene. But then, Garfield does something extremely unlikable.
I'm touched. And you must be touched in the head.
You got the dog, bring the cat, daddy the yak. See you in the morning, little fella.
He locks Odie out the house, and this causes Odie to run away and get lost and get kidnapped by a TV star, Garfield then goes on a rescue mission to LA to save Odie in order to redeem himself. And honestly, it really is a heartwarming scene when Garfield and Odie reunite.
Good to see you, partner.
I'm honestly surprised that Jennifer Love Hewitt decided to do this movie, and upon researching for this video, I had no idea that this was actually her highest grossing movie to date. Even though everyone is here to see Garfield, I do wish we could have seen Liz have a little bit more screen time, and have her and John have a better subplot for their character development. The one advantage I see with the new movie is that how it's fully animated and it nails the character designs.
Well, it took him long enough to discover my natural talents.
There are so many scenes in the movie that reference the strips from the comics and the cartoons, and this is where it feels like it tries to stay true to Garfield, like you're reading the damn comic, and I really love that. I was honestly surprised too when I heard that Chris Pratt would be voicing Garfield. And look, Chris Pratt is not a terrible actor. I just don't think his voice embodies the attitude of Garfield. He sounds way too energetic as Garfield. I mean, occasionally there are a few times where his delivery was dry, but moments like this are very rare.
I've never jumped.
And look, say what you want about the 2004 Garfield film, but Bill Murray was definitely the better voice for Garfield.
But the question is, why in the world Garfield 3?
Can this be just between us?
Yes.
Drugs cost money.
But the one thing that felt that was missing from this movie was how Garfield just didn't seem sarcastic enough. He's a little more mellow to John and Odie. See, Garfield was always kind of a bit of a troublemaker in the cartoons. He would love to cause mischief, love to play pranks on John, and would love to humiliate Odie. I mean, even in the live action film, it opens up with Garfield pranking John. Like, that was the dynamic between John and Garfield. Another thing I noticed in this movie is how Odie is also more weirdly intelligent and acts more like Garfield's servant, where in the cartoons he's depicted as an upbeat and unintelligent dog. I personally thought it was just weird how different it was here. It's like whoever wrote this movie has never seen anything from the Garfield franchise before. Samuel L. Jackson plays Vic, a new character who's Garfield's long-lost father, who abandoned him when he was a kitten. And while there is some great character development with Garfield and his father, he just didn't seem very interesting to me. Snoop Dogg also plays a character in this movie, but he's just not a dog, he's a street cat.
Oh, come on, kid. Don't beat yourself up. Vic, man, we've all been burned by Vic. Long story short, we all used to run in the pack until we had to kick him out the crook.
One thing that definitely did annoy me with this movie it's pretty common with a lot of animated movies nowadays is when they try too hard to be modern with our times, or they try to update the character. Like, obviously there hasn't been a new Garfield movie in a long time, and you know, a lot has changed since the Bill Murray days. Like, there's cell phones, there's social media, there's the internet, there's Netflix, and when they try too hard to modernize it, the movie just comes off as being painfully dated. And what's strange is that when looking back at the 2004 film, for a movie that came out 20 years ago, it still doesn't feel very dated. In fact, it feels very nostalgic, like especially like seeing the TV set and the furniture, which it really reminds me of that time period, which is the 2000s. And I feel like that's the time that Garfield perfectly fits in. I don't know, maybe I'm just used to the old school Garfield, but it just feels weird seeing Garfield using the smartphone.
Welcome to the future.
While there are some entertaining parts of the movie, such as a cute origin story with Garfield and John, once it gets to the third act, it really feels like the movie goes on way longer than it needs to be. And in fact, I'm actually surprised that this movie is actually 20 minutes longer than the live action movie. Anyone who grew up with Garfield knows that Garfield is a character that doesn't like to move around very much. He's lazy, he's sarcastic, he loves to humiliate Odie, and constantly ridicules John. Garfield's personality is defined by all these traits, and yet for some reason, this movie puts Garfield in his Mission Impossible style movie, and it just makes the story seem not very interesting. And this movie, it just feels different than the Garfield that we all know. I think I would still prefer to watch the 2004 film better. I don't know, I just feel like that movie did a better job of feeling like a Garfield movie. That movie focused more on Garfield and Odie's relationship, which I feel like was like a good direction to go in. But at the end of the day, I don't think either of these movies will ever beat the cartoons, because part of what made the cartoons so special was how they managed to find the right formula for long storytelling without having a big story to do that, and that's why they're classics. Garfield is a character that is appealing to everyone because his humor is so easy to understand. His humor deals with things that everyone can relate to. That's why I feel like he's such an iconic character, because everyone can relate to him, and people will still continue to love him. That's what makes him such a timeless character. But even if both these movies have its flaws, they both still have redeeming qualities. I would say they're entertaining to watch at least once. Garfield is a character that will remain an icon and will still continue to remain timeless. A part of me will always have a soft spot for this character.
I hate Mondays.